It is the year 2472, and the Earth has suffered a great calamity. Hundreds of years of popular culture have vanished. Without the sacred films and texts for guidance, civilization is devoid of anything cool. Then, 3 incubation chambers are unearthed, and from within, men from the time of the great blockbusters emerge. Now, through highly interesting conversations, they share invaluable insight about what once was. The movies, the shows, the comics, toys, and books. This is
the Hyperspace
Podcasting in the 25th century.
Welcome in, podcast pioneers, to the Hyperspace Podcasting in the 25th century, the interweb's first and still only podcast. My name is Jared.
My name is Mike.
And then
I'm Norman Bates.
Whoa.
That doesn't sound...
Well, that's not Matt that I hear. So,
somebody
okay.
didn't get the memo, I guess.
No, they did not get the memo. Well, so if we've got, if we got a guest named Norman Bates with us on the show, and Matt has his own case of the tube trots this week because he made the mistake of eating chocolate Halloween candy in the 25th century. And Mike, we all know what happens when you eat chocolate that is produced in the 25th century.
Yes, they haven't quite nailed the recipe down.
They haven't. Just as when you brought chocolate with you to the future and poisoned the entire population, when they try to make chocolate in the 25th century, it really goes bad for us. And
the results are explosive.
Yes, as Matt himself is finding out this week. But hey, we do have Norman Bates with us, or at least we have a sound drop of Norman Bates.
Maybe that's a hint.
Mike, of course, out of the three of us, I've always considered you to be the real horror aficionado of this group. But there is a part of this where your knowledge and my knowledge intersect. And those are with the Psycho films. And that's right. So this week, I thought we would...
I will say,
Go ahead.
I think you... I always was a fan of the original movie, but I think you were... I got into the sequels later than you, I think it's fair to say.
Well, we're going to talk today about the Psycho franchise, and we'll talk very briefly about one of the offshoots.
Really? I think that would be the most interesting
you know what?
of the match.
We'll see where this conversation goes, but I didn't see Psycho, the original, until I was 17 years old. And we had made a trip as a family to Universal Studios Florida. And at the time, and Mike, I think you got to experience it. They had this Hitchcock exhibit.
Yeah, we went when first time I visited Florida.
Yes. And at that time it was 2001 and the exhibit was still there, although its days were numbered at that point. But they had
Is it the Bourne thing now?
No, it was it's actually Shrek where Shrek 4D was, but Shrek's now closed too. So,
yeah, that's right.
But it was in that building. And that really, that summer when I went with my parents, that whole exhibit got me truly fascinated. And they also had a replica of the Bates Motel house and set on the property there back in the early 90s where they actually shot Psycho 4.
Oh, that was long gone by the time.
Yeah, it wasn't there by the time that I had actually started living here.
Well, they used to shoot stuff. That's not where they shot The Burbs, right? They shot that in L.A., didn't they?
No, they shot that in Los Angeles. But the studios that are in Florida or the two studios that were theme parks, which at the time were the Disney MGM studios and Universal Studios, they actually did, in the early days, do production work at these places. But, these days, there is none of that is left. I mean, it's all 100% theme park stuff now. But, they did have this replica of the Bates Motel, and I just became fascinated. But, I'd never seen Psycho, so when we got home from this vacation, I rented all 4 Psycho films.
Wow.
And that has really how I got into them. And of course, the original is really obviously stands alone as a classic. But what was your first memories of watching the original Psycho?
Well, I was considerably younger. It was when we were still living on Rutledge Pike, so it had to be middle school.
Okay.
And I remember it was on TBS, and I can't remember why. I guess I saw the title because, I've always been interested in horror movies. And I remember my parents were home, and it was in the middle of the day, and it was on a weekend. And it was odd that I was getting to watch something I wanted to watch. Because unlike kids these days, we only had one TV, and we watched what my parents wanted to watch. And usually sports on the weekend was on. So it was unusual to me. I think what happened is I started watching it, and they came home. Like, they weren't home. And they came home, and my dad, I remember specifically my dad sitting down and watching it with me once it was already going. So I had no idea, like I didn't know about the famous shower scene. I knew nothing about it. It was just, the movie was called Psycho.
Yeah.
And, and it was, and the thing that really kind of stands out to me is, in the original movie, when she's leaving, she's imagining what people are saying about her.
Yes.
And when I saw it as a kid, I thought that meant she was a psychic, and that's where the name Psycho came from.
You thought Janet Leigh was the psycho because
she
could
psychic
hear.
So
that's actually pretty awesome.
But then of course the murder happens, and I just remember the murder scenes, like especially with what was the police officer's name? He had a strange Arbogast. I remember, when they had that great overhead shot when she comes out of the room and he's coming up the steps, and they had that great shot of him falling and he's got blood on him.
Yes.
And of course I remember the end when Perkins,
where it's spoiler alert.
Yeah, comes into the basement after she finds the body. And, I thought that was, there's his mother. Because, I thought his mother was a person in the movie. I thought I had like no idea about the twist ending. And then Anthony Perkins comes in and he has such a great freaky look on his face. It was just really shocking. You're like, what? And it's like, wait a minute. He was the mother the whole time.
Yes.
And then there's that great little wrap up scene where the psychiatrist is explaining
what's
going on, and then the movie ends with, he's like, I wouldn't hurt a fly. And I remember when it was over, my dad, because my dad's not a movie person at all, and it's always odd when he comments on a movie. And I remember when it was over, he said something, oh man, he's just a master. I guess talking about Hitchcock.
Yeah.
So, but then I never really had any interest in the sequels, to be honest with you. I remember when Psycho 2 came on HBO, and I wasn't allowed to watch it because it was rated R. And I was never really interested in the sequels. And it wasn't until much later that I finally, I remember, I think I saw 3 before I saw 2. And I remember it came on 43.
Oh yes, Channel 43.
And I remember it was a big deal when it came out because he had directed it and he was on Good Morning America. And it had like a really great trailer. I don't know if you remember the trailer where he's like, "Mother, I'll get you." And she has that great line where she goes, "You haven't got the guts, boy." And
Okay.
it was a really interesting trailer. And when I watched it, I thought, well, this isn't too bad. I didn't think, there was a couple scenes in it I thought worked really well, especially the one that stands out is the girl putting the girl in the ice box.
Yes, and the sheriff comes
Well, when he's
and
trying
he's eating.
to, but when he's trying to put the arm in, it's like real like cringy because you don't see him, but you can see him trying to just making the movement to get this arm to go to fit.
Yes, and it finally just snaps.
So
Well,
anyway, I didn't mean to get too far out, but anyway,
that's okay.
that was my intro to the.
Well, when I first saw it, like I said, I was 17, and I watched the movie in my bedroom. I had a VCR and a TV in my bedroom, and somehow the whole time I was at Universal, walking through these Hitchcock exhibits and everything, I did not catch that Norman and his mother were the same person, and so actually watching the movie unfold, I remember I was pretty shocked. Even as a as a 17-year-old kid in 1992, when of course arguably had been exposed to much more shocking things than that point. But
Well, you'd
I
already
thought,
seen
man,
Friday 13th Part 5.
yes, I had. Oh boy, had I. But I thought the same as you. I thought like Anthony Perkins when he was all twisted up and his mouth was open and like the dress was falling off of him when he was being wrestled down by Sam Loomis. I thought, man, that is just really like unsettling and weird. And of course, the last shot of Psycho is when he's really at his creepiest, when he just like looks right at the camera and he has that grin, and they briefly superimpose Mother's skull onto his.
You almost miss it if you aren't really paying attention.
Yeah. It's extremely subtle, but it's really fantastic. And I just remember thinking, man, that is for something made in 1960, it really holds up amazingly well. And I mean, I think it's still effective. I mean, I will watch Psycho, probably once a year.
I think
and
not only the story, but it's also the score is just so fantastic. I mean, I love the opening theme. It's like that. Dun 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 dun.
And even like during the movie, during really sort of mundane scenes, like Marion just driving, they'll start it up again, and you start to feel anxious. You're like, oh man, what the heck's going on here? And then you see, Marion, she's really terrible at what she's trying to do. When she's pulled over by the cop, and she just, acts immediately suspiciously. She's like, am I acting like there's something wrong? And he's like,
I didn't steal any money.
Yes. Yeah. And then she goes and tries to trade in her car. All the while, the policeman is watching her do this. And I'm just thinking, you know what? Maybe you should just rethink this plan because he's right there. But anyway, it's I think it's kind of amusing how she's just not a thief and she's a bad liar and everything.
But what that does is create sympathy for her, even though she's done this bad thing. You don't dislike her.
Oh yeah, of course. And then she winds up at the old Bates Motel, and she has a kind of an uncomfortable conversation with Norman, but it sort of snaps her life into focus, and she's like, okay, well, I'm going back and I'm going to fess up to what I did.
Make it right. She even makes a list, writes down the money she spent
Yeah,
Out-
what she owes, and well, she doesn't make it back to Phoenix, because one of the most famous scenes in movie history happens shortly after this.
Especially considering I believe she was top billing, right?
Yeah, she was the star of the film, and even today, you look at it, you're like, there's like an hour of this movie left, and you just killed the star, and which again, it even today would be unusual, but in 1960 was like unheard of. Like, what's going to happen in this film? And then, of course, I mean, I watched Psycho not too long ago, and Anthony Perkins plays such a great, just the way he stammers and he stutters when he talks. It's a very, movies of this era.
He's very innocent.
Yes, and he seems, quite charming and pleasant at times. That you sympathize. You're like, well, this guy's not so bad. And if you haven't seen it before, you hear his mother yelling at him, and you're like, oh man, this poor guy.
I'll tell you what, that sound carries from that.
Oh yeah,
house.
which he's like,
shut up, voices carry.
Don't you have the guts, boy?
Which is interesting to note. The actress who did the voice of Mother, her name was Virginia Gregg, and she did the voice in the first 3 Psycho films.
Did she carry over?
Yeah, they didn't use. I don't know if she passed away, but they didn't use her for part 4 because I guess Olivia Hussey was fully playing her at that point. But yeah, so they did carry her over for 2 of the sequels. Perkins, and the way the scene between Arbogast and Norman, when Arbogast is really just literally tearing him apart, like he's like, every little slip up Norman makes, Arbogast is like right there. He's like, oh, you see there? You said nobody'd been here in 2 weeks, and there's somebody just there. Why don't you look at her picture? He's like, oh, yeah. Okay, I remember her now. And you're just like, man, you are also terrible at this. you just, and that scene actually was a big deal because it had a lot of something that wasn't common in those days. The dialogue was overlapping, like they were interrupting each other and talking over each other.
Which, of course, sounds more natural.
It sounds like 2 real people having a conversation. And, back in those days, of course, it was a lot of the dialogue was kept very clean and separate because they did a lot of, ADR in those days too. But this is all recorded and captured on the set as those guys are talking. But, Norman, as in that first film, he is kind of a sympathetic character until, you figure out what's happening.
Yeah, because as far as you know, he's being abused by his mother.
Yes. I mean, and even when he cleans up after her and everything, you think, well, this, he doesn't know any better. He's just trying to protect his mother, because a lot of people would have, called the police, but, he's putting people in trunks and, sinking their cars in swamps.
And plus, you got to think with not trying to be graphic, but man, her body must have been parts and pieces falling off.
Well, ripped to shreds at that point, yeah. Which, of course, it is famously known that it was Hershey's syrup that was used for the blood in the first Psycho.
Which I think was the standard in black
and
white.
Because
I know they use
black
that
and white
in Night of the Living Dead too. They use chocolate syrup.
They use, because I guess it reads more like blood.
It's like
a black and white
George
film.
Reeves Superman suit wasn't the actual colors of.
Oh, it was
Superman.
It was a different. Really? See, I didn't know that.
Yeah, because the colors read differently in black and white.
Okay, I mean, I guess it does make sense, but the first film, like we've talked about here for the last 20 minutes almost, is a classic. It's definitely
It's more than a great horror movie. It's a very well crafted. I've said this before. There's very few movies I would say is perfect, and I would say this Psycho's perfect. I mean, I just sitting here talking about it, I can't think of any goofs or like all the characters do things that seem reasonable.
Yes.
You know, it's great. Like you said, there's great dialogue. The scene between Janet Leigh and Anthony Perkins it's engaging. You know, and it's just perfect. It's just a perfect movie.
Yeah, and it definitely holds up. Now, just for a frame of reference, today I've had a very Norman Bates filled day today. I watched the last hour of Psycho 2. I watched all of Psycho 3 and most of this 1987 travesty called Bates Motel.
Let's
let's
hold off on that one.
Yeah.
It's almost surprising. I was thinking right before we started, I was like, it's almost like it feels like there should have been like a Saturday morning Psycho cartoon at this point with all the different incarnations.
Oh man, I mean, of course you have. I mean, then of course you have the Bates Motel TV show that came much later, which was probably more successful than the original Bates Motel TV show would have been.
You didn't finish that Bates Motel, but it was basically a Scooby-Doo episode. If you had watched the whole thing, you'd know what I'm talking about.
Okay, well, you'll tell us more about that in a little while.
It's 22 years later, and Norman Bates is coming home.
I own a motel not too far from here. And you'd be welcome to spend the night in one of the empty rooms if you'd like. Good night, Mary.
And he's back in business.
Psycho 2, I was thinking about this today. If you think about it, Psycho 2 is one of the first legacy sequels because it was released 23 years after the original film. Of course, when I say legacy sequel, I'm talking about things like today, which are, there's a lot of them today, like, like Force Awakens, Creed movies, Ghostbusters, Afterlife, these kind of movies where the original stars of the series are brought back out for another adventure, decades after the original films. And Psycho 2 to me seems like it would fit that description. And in doing a little more research, it's more like a legacy sequel than you would probably think, because most legacy sequels today have very mixed reactions. And it was no different for Psycho 2. When people heard that Psycho 2 was being made, they were like, this is ridiculous. You can't do this. Why are you making a sequel to this?
Well,
this is crazy. You're never going to top the original, so why even try?
Was it Universal attempting to cash in on the franchise thing that was happening at the time? Because you had Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, and it was like, well,
yes.
it's almost like the reason Star Trek: The Motion Picture got made. Everyone was trying to make the next Star Wars, and Paramount's like, hold on, we got Star Trek. Why don't we do that?
Oh, without a doubt, it was. Of course, the slasher genre was really launched with Halloween,
which of course was heavily inspired by Psycho. In fact, one of the main protagonists' character's name was Sam Loomis. And then of course there's the obvious connection of Janet Lee Jamie Lee Curtis, the daughter of Janet Leigh being the star.
Yes. And so in doing a little more research, so Halloween had come out in 1978, followed closely by Friday the 13th.
Friday the 13th is what really launched the franchises.
Yes.
Also, Halloween 2 was a result of the Friday the 13th sequels.
Yes.
They were like, Universal, again, it's like, or, what do we got? What do we got?
No, that had to be the driving force of this. Like, okay, what if we brought back this famous, horror what had become a horror icon at that point. So this movie, of course, was made despite all the protests. And Psycho 2, to me, and me and you talked a little earlier about this, Mike, watching it today, it does have a distinct early 1980s TV feel to it. I'd say, even the score by Jerry Goldsmith, it's heavily, there's a lot of synth in it. There's a lot of lush orchestra in it, but it's also punctuated by a lot of synthesizers, which to me gave it a TV sheen. But as far as the story goes, I think it's pretty effective in that, the whole thing with the first movie was the mystery of what was happening and the surprise of the twist. Now, with the audience knowing all this going into part 2, how can you make this movie also a mystery? How can you keep the audience guessing a second time when they already know what the trick is? And I thought Psycho 2 was pretty effective in that aspect.
I think I'm kind of like, as you were talking about it, it's actually I have not watched it recently, so I had to familiarize myself with it in my mind. I think the main problem with the movie, the main most unbelievable aspect is Vera Miles' character. Is that her name? Vera Miles?
Yeah. Vera Miles is the actress. It was Lila Loomis is the character's name.
Putting her daughter in danger like that. Hey, that's insane.
Go sleep in Norman's house while he's there to try to drive him crazy.
The man who killed your aunt.
Yes, please.
And also, they made her the villain, and she was the heroine of the first one.
She was. Yeah, exactly. But I think in the story they were telling, because the story is this: at the beginning of part 2, after 22 years in psychiatric institutions. And I don't even know if this is a real thing. It always strikes me as strange. The judge says, "I declare Norman Bates restored to sanity." Can a judge restore someone to sanity?
It's like temporary insanity is not actually a thing. It's not like anything that's ever been used in court, but they use it in movies all the time.
Yeah. So it's like, okay. So I find it hard. I don't know if, of course.
Yeah, but if they don't do that, they don't have a movie.
Sure.
And
I'm no legal expert, but
it's a movie.
Sure. But, Lila is in the courtroom. She's shouting. She says she has a petition, and she's yelling at the judge saying, the blood's on your hands when he kills again, and they have her removed. And so, Norman, Robert Loggia is Norman's doctor in this film. And, he escorts, they have all this stuff lined up for Norman when he gets out. He has a job lined up at a local diner. They're taking him back to live at the Bates house above the motel. And the motel is run by Dennis Franz, who is a giant turd in this movie. But
he plays it so well.
Oh, he does. And he, instantly Lila Loomis and Lila Loomis's daughter, we come to find out later, start messing with him. They're leaving him little notes around the house saying, "Hey, your mother is watching you, blah, blah, blah." And they're really, for much of the movie, Norman is really trying to hold it together.
He's the victim in the movie.
Yes, he is the one who's being bullied and victimized
Right.
by these people.
I mean, he's really genuinely trying to reform.
He is. He's going to his job at the deli every day. He's doing what he can, and of course there is more to this story. So Dennis Franz, who is running the motel, and it has basically been turned into a hotel where people
Hook up.
go to have sex and leave, and Norman, when he gets home,
Which is
he
a pretty
goes around-
believable thing.
Sure. So Norman is like, he does a walkthrough of a lot of the cabins, and he finds drugs. He finds drug paraphernalia, and he's like, this isn't gonna fly. I don't want you on my property, and I don't like what you've turned this place into. So, you're fired. Get out of here.
You're fired.
I believe his name is Mr. Toomey in the movie. So Dennis Franz he starts going crazy.
Yep,
and
that's it.
He
Warren
starts,
Toomey.
He starts calling him a loony. He's yelling at him. He goes, "You loony," and the whole time he's doing this, you just know it's like, man, this guy's gonna die soon. And so Toomey gets killed, but the way the movie sets it up, yes, it's a woman wearing kind of these Victorian boots in a dress that comes to kill him.
And that's the second twist that they're setting up.
Yes, because and the movie makes it clear it is not Norman who's doing this. Like, Norman is elsewhere. He is unavailable. He was not doing this. So you're like, well, then what's going on
What the
here?
dickens?
Yes. And we're left to wonder, well, what is going on? Which sets up sort of a lot of the mystery of the movie. And the harassment of Norman within the house continues. He's and at this time, Mike, like you said, inexplicably, Lila Loomis's daughter, who is, of course, traveling under an alias, Mary Samuels, which is kind of an Easter egg to the first movie, because the alias that Janet Leigh uses on the ledger at the hotel is Marie Samuels. She shows up at, she's working at the diner that Norman is working at, and they strike up a friendship. And she lays a sob story on Norman about how, she doesn't have any place to stay. She's broke up with her boyfriend or whatever. And so Norman is, his inclination to, be a nice guy takes over, and he's like, well, we've got a whole hotel that you can stay in while you figure things out. And so he this all happens before Toomey gets killed. And when he discovers what Toomey's doing, he wants Mary to stay in the house with him, because Toomey's running a shady place. And so this is, Mike, where you really have to go with the whole, okay, go with me here. So there's this young, attractive woman, early 20s.
Played by Meg Tilly.
Meg Tilly, sister of Jennifer Tilly. And also, her and Anthony Perkins were not buddies.
Holy cow. You hear stuff about him, and he doesn't sound like an easy person to be associated with.
Yeah, I would imagine.
I mean, he was apparently trying to get her fired and just was awful to her. Like, she doesn't even like to talk about the movie.
Yeah. The apparently she had never during the filming of Psycho 2, she had not seen the original Psycho, and she didn't really understand why the sequel was a big deal. And she made these comments, unfortunately, within earshot of Mr. Perkins, who at that point was like, okay, who I don't like this person, but they did not fire her. They kept her on, but apparently it was not a great working relationship for most of the film. But during I knew this stuff, especially while watching the movie today, and it. I mean, I don't think it really detracts from.
No, I don't think you pick it up.
No, you can't really, um, but I think the fascinating thing about the movie is while you understand that Lila and her daughter are harassing Norman, there is a third party involved that is really it's really what is driving the mystery
Bodies are
of
piling
this
up.
movie. Yes, bodies are piling up. We know it's not Norman. We know that, or we don't. We at least we think it's not Lila or Mary doing this stuff. Eventually, everything falls apart when Lila sneaks into the fruit cellar of the house where she found Mrs. Bates many years before. And she has there hidden a knife and a wig where you assume she has been dressing up like Mother to harass Norman. But she herself is confronted in the cellar by
with a famous
what?
A famous death scene.
Oh, yes. Another old woman with a butcher knife shows up and stabs her straight through the mouth, which is really a strange looking, a very weird looking death. I mean, watching today, obviously a dummy gets stabbed through the mouth, but it's pretty gruesome. And it's one of the first times this series really starts to embrace the 1980s horrorness
Slasher
of it all. Yes. And so Lila's dead, and we're like, okay, well, what's going on? And to make a long story short, Mary actually ends up killing accidentally Robert Loggia's character, who takes a spill down the stairs with a knife through his heart. And so Mary is standing over the body, and she's dressed like Mother. And this is really what sort of turns Norman once again. He sees her standing there. He starts talking to her as Mother. And she is trying to convince her that that's not what's going on. They end up in the fruit cellar, and she sees her mother's body. And at that time, she goes to actually kill Norman, and the cops show up. They see her dressed as Mother, and the cops gun her down because she's attacking Norman. And so the cops, as far as the cops are concerned, Norman's in the clear because they've sort of uncovered the story of what's been happening to him, and they think they have all the proof they need because Mary Loomis was trying to kill him dressed as Mother. And so the cop's like, "Oh, we're sorry, Norman. Come on, let's go get you patched up." And we end the movie with probably one of the greatest scenes, if not the greatest scene in motion picture history. And we find out through some bit of plot contrivance that, oh wait, Norma Bates was not Norman's mother. Norma Bates was actually his aunt, and his real mother was in an insane asylum while Norman was growing up. And this woman, who we've seen throughout the movie, she works at the diner that her name is
Emma
Poole.
Yep.
Emma Poole. She works at the diner that Norman worked at, and she comes and meets him at his house and basically lays this all on him. And Mike, why don't you tell everybody just what happens?
Well, she's telling her little story, this little old woman, and then Norman Bates is listening, and then he casually picks up a shovel and then just whacks her from up behind her head, and it's like literally the most amazing thing because it looks totally. They use a dummy, do they? I don't know. I mean,
no, I don't think they use a dummy because she actually sips her tea and starts to cough a little bit, and then just gets clocked. With the camera does not cut.
And then it's amazing. And when
there's
you watch it,
there's no CGI in these days. There's no tricks like that. And then she falls to the floor like convulsing.
Yes,
but
that whack to the head is just
it's kind of a work of art.
Yes, it's really like. I mean, me and Jared every now and then will just send that clip to each other, just because. And I think it's made all the worse because it's a little old woman.
Yes,
and he gives no hint that he's going to do that.
And this is the first kill of the movie for Norman.
Yeah.
And man, they saved the best for last for sure.
You're sure you won't have a sandwich?
Pardon?
So
I can't help but wonder if the whole movie was made just so they could shoot that scene.
At the end of Psycho 2, everything has been reset to kind of where we left Norman, or to kind of where Norman was in his heyday in the first movie. He's got the motel is open for business. He's got his taxidermied stuffed who he thinks is his mother up.
Well, no, because they kind of undo that.
They do, yes, in the next movie.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I thought you'd skip to the next movie.
Oh no, but
see, that's that to me, that ending. Because here's what I was going to say: if Psycho 2 existed by itself, I'm not sure it would work because it's one of those things where do you really want his mother from the first movie to not be his real mother?
Yeah,
exactly.
It's
kind of like what.
Because, and that's another thing that
and it's contrived.
People,
it's so contrived.
Yes. Because, they needed him to have another old lady to sit up in the window because that's where they wanted to be at the end of Psycho 2. So it was definitely a contrivance.
Well, I like that part because that's one thing that you get in the third movie that you're missing from the second one. Is that relationship with his mother.
Oh, yes, of course.
And the second one doesn't have that for obvious reasons. And that's why I think these movies as a trilogy work. Like if it just ended at 2, I think that would have been kind of a downer ending. But now you get to see like, okay, in 3, him and his mom are back in action.
All right, podcast pioneers, that is where we are going to leave it for today with our Psycho retrospective. We will be back very soon with looks at Psycho 3, Psycho 4, and the other Psycho-related projects which happened outside of the main 4 films, all part of the enduring legacy of the Psycho franchise. So keep it right here on the Hyperspace as Season 6 rolls on.
You know you can't live without this content. So subscribe to the Hyperspace, podcasting in the 25th century. Follow us on social media, leave us a review, and join us next time as we take you into the 25th century.